Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I, Vishnu Pandey, from the Delhi School of Economics, extend a very warm welcome to our distinguished guests, esteemed faculty, and bright students to this distinguished Delhi School of Economics lecture being organized jointly by the Delhi School of Economics and the Research and Information System for Developing Countries under the G20 Connect program. We are honored to have with us today our distinguished speakers, Shri Muktesh K. Pardeshi, Special Secretary G20 Operations, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, Director General RIS New Delhi, and Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy, Vice Chancellor, Bayes University. I'd now like to invite Nanika to perform the DU Kulgeet along with the welcome song.
I request you all to please stand for the DU Kulgeet. जयति जय जय जयति जय जय ज्ञान का लोक अनुपम श्रेष्ठ सुंदर दिव्य दिल्ली विश्वविद्यालय विहंगम जयति जय जय जयति जय जय ज्ञान का लोक अनुपम सकल वसुधा निज कुटुंब की भावना संस्कृति सनातन आधुनिक शिक्षा पुरातन ज्ञान धाराओं का संगम देश की स्वाधीनता हित भूमिका शतकोटि वंदन निष्ठा धृति सत्यम के मंगल दिव्य भावों का समागम जयति जय जय जयति जय जय ज्ञान का लोक अनुपम भव्य महाविद्यालयों के परिसरों से चिर सुशोभित श्रेष्ठ गुरुजन कर रहे नित छात्र और छात्राएं दीक्षित सच्चरित्राचार पावन साधना संकल्प संयम नवल वैश्विक चेतना नव क्रांति संस्कारों का उद्गम जयति जय जय जयति जय जय ज्ञान का लोक अनुपम श्रेष्ठ सुंदर दिव्य दिल्ली विश्वविद्यालय विहंगम जयति जय जय जयति जय जय ज्ञान का लोक अनुपम ज्ञान का लोक अनुपम ज्ञान का लोक अनुपम ज्ञान का लोक अनुपम I would now request everyone to kindly take their seats. स्वागतं शुभ स्वागतं मथ स्वागतं शुभ स्वागतं आनन्द मङ्गल मङ्गलम् आनन्द मङ्गल मङ्गलं नितप्रियं भारत भारतम् नितप्रियं भारत भारतम् स्वागतं शुभ स्वागतं मथ स्वागतं शुभ स्वागतम्
Thank you, Nanika. I would now like to invite Professor Pammi Dua, Director, Delhi School of Economics, to deliver the welcome address.
A very good afternoon to everyone here. I extend a warm welcome to all of you to the Delhi School of Economics, especially to our distinguished speakers, Ambassador Muktesh Pradeshi, Special Secretary, G20 Operations, Ministry of External Affairs, and also our distinguished alumnus. Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, Director General, Research and Information System for Developing Countries, and Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy, Vice Chancellor, D.R. Ambedkar School of Economics, University, Bengaluru. I am also honored and privileged to welcome you to the distinguished parent institution of the Delhi School of Economics, the University of Delhi, which is celebrating its momentous existence of more than 100 years. The University of Delhi was founded on May 1st, 1922 with 3 colleges and 750 students. Now, a century later, the university includes 90 colleges, 16 faculties, 86 departments, and almost 7 lakh students. Drawing students and faculty from all over India and abroad, and transforming their lives in many ways, the University of Delhi contributes to the intellectual growth of the country while providing opportunities for social, scientific, cultural, and economic well-being of the nation and the world, thus living up to its ideal of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. A few words about the Delhi School of Economics. Established in 1949 as a center for advanced learning and research in the social sciences, it has entered its 75th year, signifying 75 glorious years of commitment to excellence and dynamism. Our founder director, Professor V.K. R.V. Rao, believed in fostering integrated human development through holistic education. He also stressed the importance of the Delhi School of Economics fraternity and the Delhi School of Economics family. He considered this as one family. The Delhi School of Economics currently comprises the departments of Economics, Geography, and Sociology of the University of Delhi. I take this opportunity to welcome the heads of the constituent departments, Professors Surinder Kumar, Anindita Datta, and officiating head Anuja Agarwal. It is notable that India's premier library in the social sciences, the Ratan Tata Library, is also located in the Delhi School of Economics premises. In the 75th year of its existence, the following words of the founder director of Delhi School of Economics, Professor V.K. R.V. Rao, continue to aptly describe the Delhi School of Economics. After all, there are many universities, but only one Delhi School of Economics. It is remarkable that the centenary year of the University of Delhi, the Diamond Jubilee of the Delhi School of Economics, and the auspicious year of India's G20 presidency more or less coincide. The theme of India's G20 presidency, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or One Earth, One Family, One Future, affirms the value of all life, human, animal, plant, and microorganisms, and their interconnectedness on the planet Earth and in the wider universe. It is thus relevant and pertinent to find solutions to global challenges to promote well-being of all. Priority areas include life, lifestyle for environment, sustainable production and consumption, inclusive and resilient growth, attainment of sustainable development goals, knowledge sharing in areas such as digital public infrastructure and financial inclusion, as well as green development with globally transformative actions resulting in a cleaner, greener, and bluer future. I welcome all of you once again and look forward to enlightening lectures by our distinguished speakers. Thank you all very much.
I thank ma'am for her address. I would now request Professor Pammi Dua, Director, Delhi School of Economics, to felicitate our distinguished speakers for the day. Ambassador Muktesh Pardeshi. Ambassador Muktesh K. Pardeshi is currently Special Secretary in India's G20 Secretariat, Ministry of External Affairs, since July 2022. He is a career diplomat who joined the Indian Foreign Service in the year 1991. Earlier, during July 2019 to July 2022, he served as the High Commissioner of India to New Zealand. He was also concurrently accredited as the High Commissioner of India to Samoa, Niue, and the Cook Islands. He was educated at the University of Delhi, where he obtained BA Honours from Hindu College and Masters in Sociology from the Delhi School of Economics in the year 1987 to 1989. Sir, we welcome you back to your alma mater.
Professor Sachin Chaturvedi. Professor Sachin Chaturvedi is currently Director General at the Research and Information System for Developing Countries, RIS, a New Delhi-based think tank. He works on issues related to development economics involving development finance, SDGs, and South cooperation. Currently, he is member, Board of Governors, Reserve Bank of India. He's been closely associated with Yale University and University of Amsterdam. During India's G20 presidency, he has led the University Connect program, apart from being closely associated with several other groups. Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy. Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy is the first Vice Chancellor of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar School of Economics, University, Bangalore. He is currently on deputation from NIPFP, New Delhi, where he has been a professor since 2009. Prior to this, he worked at Institute of Economic Growth, Delhi. He has served on various government committees and is currently serving as Managing Trustee of the Indian Econometric Society Trust and also Managing Trustee of Indian Economic Association Trust for Research and Development since 2010. He was Secretary of the Indian Econometric Society for over 17 years between 2006 and 2023. As part of India's G20 presidency, Dr. Bhanumurthy is the chair for the T20 Task Force 1 on macroeconomics, trade, and livelihoods. We welcome you all, sir.
I thank everyone on the dais. I would now like to invite Ambassador Muktesh Pardeshi to deliver his distinguished lecture for the day.
Very good afternoon and namaskar. Professor Pammi Dua, Director of Delhi School of Economics. My friend and colleague, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, Director General, RIS. Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy from B.R. Ambedkar School of Economics, University, faculty members, and dear students. For me, it's indeed a very happy moment, and I would say very gratifying to return to Delhi School of Economics when it's going to celebrate 75 years of its existence. So my congratulations to D School, where I spent my formative years of the student life before joining the Foreign Service in '91. I was here during 87, 1989, I did masters. And for a year, I enrolled myself for MPhil, which I couldn't complete. In the meanwhile, I was selected for the Foreign Service. The memories that I have of the D School, of course, the Ratan Tata Library, the well-stocked and one of the best, I would say, in the world in the field of social sciences. I also benefited tremendously from tutorial and seminar system that we had, and I'm sure it's continuing. The ratio of faculty members and students is fantastic. There are very few institutions in the country which can boast of professor-student ratio as we had in Delhi School of Economics those days, and I'm sure it's continuing. This is a happy year because Delhi University also celebrated 100 years, and I attended a few months back where Honorable Prime Minister was the chief guest. So I'm very happy in the context of the 100 years of the Delhi University and 75 years of Delhi School of Economics, and 2023 being the G20 year. I think these are important markers in our respective calendars. So I'm very happy. In fact, the idea of this distinguished lecture was born when we were traveling from Bangalore to Delhi, and I was a co-traveler. So when I introduced, we had met, of course, in Mysore for Think 20. In the course of discussion, the idea, she spoke about the distinguished lectures, and she asked me whether I will be joining such kind of venture if the D School were to organize. So here I am. Friends, this year 2023 has been an exceptional year for the country in terms of our G20, the presidency. Only a few days back, we had a very successful G20 summit, historic, unprecedented, and full of outcomes. I have been asked to speak on the organizational part, and I will dwell upon how we conducted these meetings and what is there for the country in terms of taking inferences from what has happened during last 1 year. I make out 7 inferences from our successful the presidency, and the presidency is still ongoing until 30th November. Before we conclude our presidency, we are going to have a virtual summit of leaders to take stock of the progress in few weeks that we have, and also create some kind of action plan, both nationally as well as for the G20, the member countries. When I look at inferences, the first of them is our inclusive approach towards a global event. And this came out very clearly when we started planning for the G20, the summit. Honorable Prime Minister, who has laid from the front. In fact, the other day, on 12th, after 2 days of G20 summit, he dropped in at Sushma Swaraj Bhavan, and he spent 2.5 hours with the Secretariat. And he mentioned that, well, I know people are here, gathered here to celebrate the hard work that you have done, but I am also joined your celebration because I have also worked very hard on this. So friends, he has actually worked very hard on taking advantage of G20 presidency for creating ability, national ability to negotiate through and come up with an outcome document which is agreeable to all, and also preparing the country. We just had 75 years of independence, and when we are embarking upon Amrit Kal, and the Prime Minister is very particular the next 25 years is going to be shaped and made by the newer generation. That's why in parallel we have the University Connect program, and tomorrow we have grand finale of the University Connect program. After having gone to 101 universities physically, tomorrow that's a culmination. And internationally, by having an agenda whereby the global south and its voice could also be heard. So that's the first inclusiveness. The second one for the success of any the event is how do we have an effective organizational framework which is set up in time, which is provided with adequate human resources, adequate financial resources, and which has a vision. Here we got, once again, we got benefited from Prime Minister's direct understanding and observation of 9 G20 summits. So in the Secretariat, recently it was his 10th appearance. So he's closely watched the evolution of G20 agenda, how different countries had organized. So he had a very clear vision of how we would like to present G20 to the world. And through his suggestions, advices, guidelines, and meetings came several ideas. And out of those ideas, we created an organizational blueprint. Now, the inclusiveness was reflected in the third inference, which I'll speak, unifying principles. You know, last with COVID-19 and then geopolitical divide between East and West, North and South, Ukraine. And just imagine. So in the context of this divisive geopolitical backdrop, we thought of talking about unifying principles. And those unifying principles came early on in the shape of two things. The logo, which is pro-planet and speaks about life, and then the motto, that the theme of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Actually, delegates are elated to know how India could find a phrase in its ancient text to represent contemporary global issues. So, one earth, or one family, or one future. And the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, if you take it in its entirety, that the essence. So the essence we found in our own classical texts. So this again has been a master stroke by the Indian leadership, how to represent unifying the principles. In terms of advancing G20 agenda, you know, G20 for last 20 years, many times the agenda items are passed from one presidency to other. But still scope for presidency to add on, subtract something, expand the agenda. So here we decided to have inclusion of those items on the G20 agenda which are dear to us nationally, which reflect our national priorities, as well as which should reflect the voice of the global south. And I'm sure Dr. Sachin Chaturvedi will dwell upon this theme more elaborately. So the voice of the global south and several other socio-economic issues which are relevant nationally were brought in the advancing G20. We had more invitee countries than anybody else, And when we sent invitations to countries to join our meetings, the special care taken to have maximum representation from African, the continent. So we had 42 delegations, and there were several from Africa like Nigeria, Egypt, Mauritius. And then from the neighborhood, we also invited a homegrown, and I was the Delhi-based international organizations like International Solar Alliance, and there's another body called CDRI, Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. Both are based in NCR, and we invited them, and they got an opportunity to understand the G20 agenda items, how does it work, and we take it from there. In terms of putting on concrete agenda items, we created a working group on disaster risk resilience. We had something on cyber security added. We had a startup engagement group, which was otherwise part of the Business 20, considering the ecosystem, vibrant startup ecosystem that we have in country. We thought that let's focus on by creating a separate group in this. Giving voice to the global south. See, there was one thing to claim that we have the voice of the global south. There is quite another when you actually consult them and elicit their concerns and interests. This precisely was done when in January we convened a summit, virtual summit of the Voice of the Global South, which was participated by 125 countries. So here was an opportunity, direct opportunity to consult 125 countries of the developing world to understand their concerns, understand their priorities, and how to channelize them in the G20 process. Narrating India's story, that is another the initiative on inference we can draw upon from what we have done. I mean, this kind of opportunity does not come every year. We'll have to wait for another 20 years to host G20. We have hosted several big diplomatic events, but not at the size and scale of the G20 in the past. We have hosted non-aligned summit. We had a summit of the Commonwealth heads of states and government. In 2015, we had India-Africa summit. But this was for the first time that a very high-profile diplomatic event took place in India, where you have all important P5 countries, all most developed countries in the world, and also the emerging economies. So this gave an opportunity for us to make our national priorities as part of India's story, brand India, or India narratives. For instance, the narrative on digital financial inclusion, or the role of digital transformation, or women-led development. Similarly, the whole notion of diversity and India's role and the history of democratic evolution in the country. All these issues found proper place in one manner or other throughout the year. And finally, friends, it rarely happens that a diplomatic event can be converted into people's movement. And here was Prime Minister's vision, and I think we have done fantastically well. In terms of doing G20, connecting it to domestic constituency, and constituency does not political constituency. I mean, there are different segments of society. We have women, we have youth, you have students, we have taxi drivers, we have craftspeople. We, in a very innovative manner, all the side events, seminars, programs were done in a manner that wherever these 200 plus meetings took place, it was the local town, the local city, which found resonance in those meetings. So what we did, there was a conferencing. G20 is essentially conferencing. We added on 3 layers of siege over that. So at the core you have conferencing. We padded that with the whole cultural context of the place where the meetings were taking place. So if the meeting was taking place in Nagaland, we took them to the local festival which was happening. We coincided in a manner, and some of the issues of Northeast was taken up and added to what was happening there. Then the second was cuisine. So if the meeting was taking place in Kerala, they will not find tandoori chicken there. It was the Kerala food which will be served. If the meeting was taking place in Gujarat, it was Gujarati thali. And then final C was the crafts. We very consciously thought of promoting what is called one district, one product item. And that has given a fillip in terms of publicizing those products, the local products, and making branding around that. And I can share with you, the local craftsmen were so happy when they could see international delegates putting the images of those gift items or delegate kit internationally. So one was through this manner. We, wherever the events took place, we thought to engage the local society, and the G20 University Connect became a tool in that direction. So if the meeting was taking place in Diu, and imagine when the G20 meeting took place in Diu, it was for the first time that any event of international nature was happening there. So we had to create capacity in the place, and the meeting took place in the university there. A lot of training, the faculty members, students, they all joined hands with the local government in becoming the volunteers, the resource people. So when we had the University Connect program, they would be exposed to what is G20 and what is there for the local populace in terms of international the event. Friends, these are some of the inferences which I draw from the successful presidency of ours. This will this will have resonance in our country for some time. What is important, that out of this the presidency, one or two things which have come up very sharply and which will be remembered for long. One is, we have created ability and we have showcased ability to the world that we can do big events, and we have diplomatic ability to make bridges. So this was the first. And the second one was through multiple things that we have done. Very consciously, we have created capacity in amongst the younger generation to deal with not only substantive socio-economic challenges, but also the event management, logistics, the tourism, the infrastructure building, hospitality boost up. So this has been, in a summary, the contribution of G20 for our country and for different segments of society. Thank you very much for giving this opportunity.
Thank you so much, sir, for your address. I would now like to invite on stage Professor Sachin Chaturvedi to deliver his distinguished lecture for the day.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Professor Dua, for getting all of us here together. It's a great pleasure to join this lecture series, and Ambassador Muktesh Pardeshi has already set the ball rolling. And I was just telling him that it was such a pleasure to hear the full account from him, somebody who shaped the action, though he was giving credit to the seniors, which I think was largely the vision, but to put it in on ground is something that Ambassador Pardeshi has done it with his huge team and huge secretariat. I think it was not easy. It was extremely difficult. I am also delighted to share this dais with my dear friend Bhanu. So great, Bhanu, to have you here. I also acknowledge presence of Professor Surendra Kumar, Professor Datta, and of course my friend Professor Ram. I think a couple of issues are important when we talk about G20 and some of our young colleagues. I think the context has to be very, very clear. And some of us who worked in with RIS for all these years do recall shaping of us at RIS by none other than Professor Sukhmoy Chakravarti. So we had great pleasure and privilege of working very closely with him at RIS. And he shaped, and I think when Professor Dua was elaborating on DU's 100 years and these schools 75, I was also reminded of the great role Delhi School of Economics has played in terms of designing and shaping India's economy and the policies of the country. So that way, I think, starting from VKRV Rao, coming up to Sukhmoy and then Professor Tendulkar, I think we had great minds working, shaping, and engaging with policymakers. And this is, friends, largely the idea of University Connect, to keep that at a much wider level and much wider level in terms of both shaping the direction of the policy, but also bringing in realism. And as growing emphasis is, the idea is to localize the growth strategies, development strategies. How do we factor them in? And this is largely the case when we talk about G20's own evolution. So some of the youngsters, I would just like to very much mention to you, and I'm sure media, which was full with G20 coverage, I don't have to repeat anything. But I think you might have noticed 3 points which are important in terms of the genesis and evolution of G20. So if you see the crisis which happened in 97, 98 of the real estate in Southeast Asia, which now is in another way repeating itself in China. And those of us who are following China very closely, we are worried in terms of how this surplus would be handled by China. Anyway, so going back to that 97, 98, this crisis actually was confined to Southeast Asia, but it had spillovers all across, and that's where the finance ministers and central bank governors met. And this was then in 99 became Forum, and it continued managing till Lehman Brothers collapsed in 2007. And that collapse actually led to a very big debate in terms of what kind of development strategy we want. And then came in South Korea, which in 2010 added this huge pillar, which now is called as Sherpa pillar. So you have 2 tracks in G20. One is the finance track, on which Bhanu would be talking about. The other track got added in 2010 by South Korea to bring in development issues. Because the theory goes back to what Sukhmoy wrote, and some of you might have seen that thin yellow book by Sukhmoy, which talks about planning. I think it's very important to read that book and to discuss. That brings in the context back in 2010, when people say that development is important, and development, without handling development, you cannot solve financial problems. So excessive financialization of our profession of economics requires to be seen from a distance as well. The neoliberal approach has in a way derailed many of our minds and has taken away largely the development dimension, and that also goes to the way we have seen rise of economics and also Chicago School of Economics. So that somehow diluted the very purpose with which things evolved. But good that it came in from South Korea. Some of us were part of Busan Forum, which provided inputs to the G20, but at that time in 2010 and 11, there were two major processes on development finance, which Busan was leading, South Korea was leading, in terms of how to enhance effectiveness of aid or development finance. So all that dimension is very much a part of the genesis of the G20's second vertical, which is about development. So that dimension, I think we should not forget. And it is from 2010 onwards, from South Korean presidency, that the development became intrinsic part of the philosophy of managing global finance. And it was at that point, some of us who met in South Korea later met in Mexico, and T20 was given birth to at Mexican presidency of G20. So T20 evolved, and that's what Ambassador Muktesh Pardeshi was referring to when he said in Mysore he met Professor Dua to discuss this seminar of today. But this was also our idea in terms of how University Connect should come in. And as Ambassador Pardeshi said, tomorrow Prime Minister would address university students at the University Connect. You can join it online if you haven't already got registered. So that would bring in three major focuses, and something that D School has been focusing on all this while. First and foremost is to expose ourselves to the intricacies of the debates that have happened during G20. Media has reported only little part of it. Much deeper issues are there, and I am asked by Professor Dua to cover one dimension of it, which I would just very quickly come in. I see that we have very limited time tomorrow. We are holding much bigger events, so I also would have to rush early. And I have been given 20 minutes, so I don't want to cross even a second. So I think first and foremost here is to internationalize the way we are producing research, and not just from some elite universities, but from across the country. So how do we take that burden forward? And that's where we were asked to do 75 universities, and fortunately, with great support from G20 Secretariat, from MEA, and from UGC, we could reach out to 101. So this is 97th lecture today in that series. So I'm extremely delighted, Professor Dua, that you have joined before it is 100. And I'm so glad that I'm here for this lecture. The second important part of this is to connect thematic platforms. So several thematic platforms have come up, which China during Chinese presidency did. Germany has done it, and now US has already started preparing such thematic platforms. So US turn would come only after Brazil and South Africa. But some of the academics have started approaching us that for the G20 presidency of US, they are now preparing and launching 2-year-long research projects to see what macroeconomic stability would bring in and what kind of climate change patterns we are seeing. So that connect what South Korea did in 2010 of finance and development. Now people are going 2 steps further to factor in exogenous factors that are going to influence our decisions of COP, etc. So that is another dimension where researchers have to involve, and that's what is the second objective of the University Connect, to bring in research which is of significance for policy making at various levels. The third, and I think much more important, is to bring in these thematic focus areas which have been done to our journals, because there are very few journals which are publishing quality peer-reviewed publications, and if you have to do that in India, you don't get one or you find too many. UGC is also grappling with that quality question. Everybody is grappling with that, and unfortunately the publications which are there from outside are extremely costly for us to get into, unless you have the networks which are funding and providing the scope for taking that out. So that's the third major objective. So with these objectives, the University Connect was launched, which, if I come back to my point which I was making in terms of the research-based inputs influencing G20 discussions, and that I think is extremely important. When leaders come in, things get onto track when people feel that what exactly is there. But there are certain important dimensions, and I think G20's Delhi Declaration is something which is worth reading. There are 83 paragraphs, I understand, but I would suggest everyone to read it and see the nuancing that has happened. Declarations can capture only up to a point, but if you see the kind of development models post-war has given us, they all have focused on capital and labor. And that's where, whether we talk about Arthur Lewis, we talk about Harold Domer, we talk about Solo Swan, we find that capital and labor, they are just focused. But as we go further, we find that things have moved beyond in terms of that binary for influencing the development trajectory. The 1972 Oslo Summit, the 1992 Rio Summit, they changed the track on which it was going. And I go back to my story of bringing development along with finance. So that, I think, is extremely important for us to bring that convergence. And then you find this precipitating in form of what in 1980s Amartya Sen and Mahbubul Haq on one end talked about the idea of human quality, human resources, and the human development reports came in. And there was another group that was talking about basic needs. So when you talk about in 2000, 2001, when the Millennium Development Goals came in, we thought of addressing all the 8 goals. And if you see the first 7 goals of Sustainable Development Goals, they are nothing but MDGs, unfinished MDGs all across. But there is a difference. And what is the difference between MDG and SDG? This answer you get in the G20 declaration, because it talks about quality of life, how you improve quality of life. Prime Minister has time and again emphasized in terms of going beyond GDP. And he's saying that going beyond GDP to bring in the human-centric development strategy. What is human development-centric strategy? So we go back to the idea where quite a few people are talking about instead of GDP, we should have the well-being index. What is well-being index? How it is computed? For which all countries it is being published? Huge of these debates are relevant for us to understand what G20 stands for. And this goes nowhere other than the prime focus of the Indian G20 presidency, which is LIFE, Lifestyle for Environment or Lifestyle for Sustainable Development. So today when I'm talking to you, there are 3 tracks that I'm speaking to you about. One is to see the development connect with the financial sector and its convergence point. Second, to bring in quality of life and focus it through SDGs, and which was one of the priorities, accelerating SDGs. You might have heard UN Secretary General in his press conference in Delhi itself said that only 12% of the total SDGs. So 17 goals, 167 indicators, 167 targets, and 259 indicators. If you see them, only 12% global aggregate accomplishments. In India, Niti Aayog has yet to issue the report where we are, but as Prime Minister said in his speech, we are at midpoint. Accelerating SDG, there is no other way, but we have to go that way. Agenda 2030 has to be accomplished, and there are goals and targets already defined for various goals. So if you see MDGs, which were the first 8 of the SDGs now, they are still unaccomplished. There are challenges in terms of how we go forward, but they are different from MDG when we talk about SDG, as I said, in form of quality. So we don't talk about number of schools, but we talk about quality of education in those schools. So goal number 4, which is about education, is talking about quality of schooling, and it doesn't talk about number of schools, which we focused, number of blackboards, etc. So that part has gone. The second comes in form of quality. So we are not talking about food security, we are talking about nutritional security. The moment we started talking about nutritional security, the war broke out, and food security is back on the table. So deceleration in our target of SDGs. So we have to accelerate that. But at the same time, quality of life is important, and that's where idea of life comes in, lifestyle for environment. This requires innovation. It requires finance. How do we mobilize finance, and how do we mobilize the technology? On finance part, if you see, India has already invested in the last financial year. You might have seen Finance Minister reported with her budget speech. India has invested $137 billion over last 5 years in terms of capital formation in the country. And this capital expenditure has given a new lease of life to our economy, and this states have also replicated. Banu would refer to it in his own write-ups. He has mentioned several of these factors. So this capital formation by the state governments, by the central government, has given the huge push that the economy required. Much more is needed, but then we haven't gone anyone for borrowing money for our development or infrastructure requirements. Of course, resources have been mobilized. On technology, if we go back to Schumpeter, the creativity, the distraction, all that he talked about, we find that time and again through several technological cycles. And this is where AI-related dimensions have come up in the G20 New Delhi Declaration, where they are talking of quality of life, but connect it with ethics. Ethics are quite abstract when we talk about them in European context or in Western context in general. For India, ethics cannot be out of access, equity, and inclusion. So AEI has to be our basis to address AI-related challenges that are there. And they bring in the dimensions that are important. Now, when we are talking about quality of life, when we are talking about life, when we are talking about a number of other dimensions of quality of life, SDGs, we need to see the geopolitics which comes in. China was opposed to having any expression, and Ambassador Muktesh Pardeshi would tell you, they were opposed to the idea of we giving any new phrase in in any of the declarations. So there is a development working group which talks about the lifestyle for environment. They said, no, this is not acceptable. Then our brilliant EAM, External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, then he said, are you opposed to sustainable development? They said no. So then he said, what is the problem if we say lifestyle for sustainable development? So they said, that is perfectly fine. So then what we proposed as lifestyle for environment, which Prime Minister said in COP 26, in Varanasi meeting of Development Working Group, it became lifestyle for sustainable development. The phraseology doesn't matter, geopolitics does. And this then is important in terms of how we connect with other developing countries, the fallow developing countries, what now we call as Global South, which earlier we used to call as South-South cooperation. So if you see 1983 paper by Raul Prabisk and by Shukmoy on how the NIEO, the new International Economic Order, looks like, it talked about South-South cooperation. It talked about Global South, and it talked about developing countries collating resources together, which Arthur Lewis also did. But things have changed. The dimensions have changed. The proprietary nature of technologies has changed. The dimensions of or the quantum of finance that you require has changed. The modalities has changed. So in the new context, how this would look like, what kind of modalities we can really have, and for that, what India has achieved. So you might have seen on 12th and 13th of January, Prime Minister did this virtual summit with Global South. It was called as Voice of Global South. And this Voice of Global South, it talked about what can be done in this new context for Global South, for collating our development experiences, for mobilizing resources without getting into indebtedness. So again, 5 paragraphs are there in the Delhi Declaration, which have talked about indebtedness, which have talked about what kind of solution. China was not open to use the word debt or debt crisis. So we could not use it in the declaration, but it makes absolutely clear what the text is saying. Even they did not want to use the word recapitalization of MDBs. So you would not find that word, you would not find that word in the declaration. So those kind of geopolitical issues which have disturbed the track of thinking and our development positioning requires to be understood. But has to be articulated, has to be taken forward. So those dimensions, I would very much encourage Madam not to end our partnership with today's lecture. RIS is extremely delighted to reconnect with Delhi School of Economics. I would very much encourage students and faculty to connect with us. We are engaged with several policy relevant issues. With Professor Ram, I was already discussing some of these dimensions for engagement, and I think in the Indian economic and other platforms, Professor Surin Kumar has been contributing in terms of policy issues. I think these dimensions are to be deepened further for our analysis, and for your dissertation and research, these dimensions can be taken forward in terms of how we shape, understand, and take forward our global engagement. Thank you.
I thank Sir for your lecture. I would now like to invite Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy to deliver his distinguished address.
Good evening, everyone. Professor Pami Dua, Ambassador Muktesh Pardeshi, my good friend Sachin Chaturvedi, faculty members of Delhi School of Economics, and students' friends. It's a pleasure for me to be part of this event. And for the past 1 year, we have been together for many events. I think this is one of the last events, I think so. And it's also a pleasure to be part of this Delhi School of Economics. As Sachin pointed out, I also have some relation with Delhi School of Economics. And I don't know how many students know that founder of this Delhi School, Professor V.K.R.V. Rao, he has 3 daughters, right? Delhi School of Economics, Institute of Economic Growth, and Institute for Social and Economic Change. Maybe I'm one of the very few privileged persons to be part of all the 3 institutions. So I did my PhD from Isaac. I started my career in Institute of Economic Growth, and I co-led a project on Project Link with Professor Pami Dua at Delhi School of Economics. So it's always an honor to be part of this. I would like to congratulate the whole team of Ministry of External Affairs. Ambassador Pardeshi is here. I'm sure all of you know that this is one of the very few G20 summits where you get the consensus on the declaration on the first half of the day. And I think that all credit goes to the backroom boys, they say. And I don't know how many of you know what happened in Bali, right? Bali, I mean, I know 2 days or 3 days, the leaders have to extend their, programs. But here, the leaders have preponed their programs. US President left the country much earlier than what he's supposed to do. So to that extent, I think all credit should go to the Ministry of External Affairs for making the India's G20 presidency a very, very memorable for all the generations to come forward. And again, I would like to thank and congratulate Professor Sachin Chaturvedi. If you want to really know what is meant by Jan Bhagidari, you must see the event tomorrow. I think, I'm sure, again, all of you know that yesterday Prime Minister's Man Ki Baat, he referred to this event, the tomorrow's event, and the way they are mobilizing people to be part of this event, I think that is what that should be the best example that you can give for Jan Bhagidari, and I wish you all the best for tomorrow's event, Sachin, for this. And I also want to tell the students of economics here, many times we do research on, multi-country or multi-state, but when you get some results, you will certainly get confused yourself, and you also confuse the readers of your papers. When you work on some Indian states, or when you work on, developing countries or developed countries, you always confuse yourself first, particularly when some of the econometric results. But at the same time, you also confuse the readers. But if you read this document, this is the most difficult document to be written in my view. But if you look at the language, I think the students of economics should really learn from this document how we can write a most complicated issues in a very simple and acceptable way. I think we all should read this, and maybe Ambassador should tell us how to write this kind of documents. This is the most difficult one we come across. Uh, in terms of if you look at the topic, in fact, it says that G20 India presidency way forward. I think we have completed the summit meeting, and now we are looking at what is the way forward and what all happened in the G20 deliberations. As Sachin pointed out, you have a document which is a summary of many studies that has come up under different tracks. And one more thing that I want to highlight here, many of the working groups, there was no consensus. There was no, declarations, I think, particularly in the finance and central bankers track. But suddenly you see all consensus happening in this. So in a way, I think the leaders have really come to the table to really address some of the issues. I'm not sure how many of you have seen that yesterday's NDTV discussion where Larry Summers points out the world is on fire. I think that's the word he uses. The fire in terms of the war, the refugee issues, and also the fire that we see in places like Hawaii, where the climate crisis is leading to fire in many places. And this is the context where the G20 India's presidency has taken up. And Sachin also pointed about the Lehman Brothers crisis. And as a students of economics, again, I want to bring some of the basic issues here if you want to really understand how India was really very well placed to take this India's presidency, and it's actually reflected in all the discussions and deliberations that happened under all the tracks of G20. We know that in post-global financial crisis, despite not having much domestic crisis, India had to face a crisis, the post-global financial crisis. I think we have seen the crisis in 2009 and 10, but not in 2007 and 8. The reason is we have followed some of the policies of the Western countries, and we went for a stimulus kind of measures in the post-global financial crisis, which led to the crisis in the domestic economy. Even during the crisis period in 2008, Indian economy was growing at 6.8%. Okay, but post-global financial crisis, we all know what happened. We had seen macroeconomic instability in terms of high inflation, high current account deficit, and all those things that happened. But after 10 years, in the post-COVID period, why India has not got into the crisis that India faced in the post-global financial crisis? I think this is the point I would like to mention here when you talk about India's role in the G20 presidency, is that the way India has managed the post-COVID crisis, I think that should be an example for many countries to really follow. And I think in one of the meetings, I'm sure Sachin remembers me, that I did say that the way India managed post-COVID policies should be an example for other countries. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why India has become a bright spot right now. And in fact, last week, JP Morgan has actually included Indian government bonds as part of their index, and I think we traveled in that path for the last 10 years. And I'm here to tell you what we have done right? And if you look at the post-COVID policies, one of the things that happened for us is, compared to the post-global financial crisis, that we had a perfect coordination between the fiscal and monetary authorities in the post-COVID policies. Now, if you look at the same fiscal monetary coordination in the post-global financial crisis, I don't want to tell you how the former central bankers have written the books on it, right? Who moved my interest rates, I do what I do, all those things. But now you don't see those kind of books coming up because we have a much, much better fiscal monetary coordination, and that actually did extremely well for us. And that's one of the reasons why we have become a bright spot in the troubled global economic order. And in fact, I wrote somewhere saying that the fiscal monetary coordination should be a public good, okay? And I think that is something, I did discuss in the T20 deliberations, but it is there in the T20 communique somewhere, but maybe it's not been part of the G20 in that sense. So there is so much of literature has been developed as part of the India's G20 presidency. particularly in the T20, if you look at, there are something like 500 policy briefs. In fact, Professor Dua has 2 or 3 or 4? 3, yes. Some more to come. So Professor Pamidu also contributed so much to the T20 deliberations. And there are very short policy briefs. By name, policy brief means it's not a technical one. I urge all the students, those who are here, to look at some of the discussion that happened as part of the T20 deliberations. When it comes to the whole, if you look at the whole global financial order right now, one variable that creates trouble for everybody, okay? But unfortunately, even in our classroom lectures, we don't really talk about it. It is not the GDP growth, it is not the inflation, it is the public debt, okay? Unfortunately, even in Indian context, we don't bring that concept of public debt. And if you look at the whole discussion on the finance tract was actually to see how we can deal the growing debt conditions in not only in emerging market economies and but also in the global south and low and middle income countries. And this is exactly where the India's G20 presidency has made a major contribution. If you look at the finance track, I would say it is in many aspects are work in progress. For example, if you look at the declaration, how they worded, the CBDC is a work in progress. Cryptocurrency issues are work in progress. And when it comes to, except in the case of financial inclusion, I think there are very clear-cut, endorsement that the G20 makes, how we can enhance, financial inclusion, not just on the G20 countries, and also among the non-G20 countries. So, as I say, as the previous speakers pointed out, India's G20 was very inclusive. And I think if you look at the, the wordings, many places they talk about non-G20 countries. I think that shows India's leadership in including other countries. And in fact, one of the biggest success was including African Union. I don't know, I was hoping Ambassador would speak on that. African Union becoming member of the G20, permanent member of G20 is something that shows to the India's leadership. In terms of reforming multilateral development banks, India's G20 presidency also brought in this independent expert group, okay, led by, for once I got confused, it also says IEG, right? And the NK Singh, leading IEG, I thought Institute of Economic Growth, but it is an independent expert group where the first report has been given by the independent expert group, and large part of the report talks about capital adequacy ratios, macroprudential norms. Again, we should be really eternally thankful to one institution in this country. Can anybody tell which institution? In Delhi, there is a problem. They don't remember Reserve Bank of India. One institution which has done so much, not just for the domestic financial sector, but also for the global financial sector, is the Reserve Bank of India. We talk about so much about macroprudential norms, and it was Reserve Bank of India under the leadership of Dr. Y.V. Reddy who brought these macroprudential norms to the literature of global finance. And I think there is so much discussion about how we can integrate the macroprudential norms such a way that it provides more resources for development finance. And in fact, NK Singh committee report actually talks about 3 issues. I think they talk about triple issues like triple mandate, tripling finance, tripling mechanism to enhance resources for triple mandate that is said, eradication of poverty, increased shared prosperity, and contributing to the global public good. In fact, for all the 3, they talk about tripling sustainable finance, and they would like to see that every year there will be an increase of 3 trillion for providing for supporting the sustainable development goals. And they also talk about third pillar for funding some of the sustainable related developmental issues. And I think that particular document talks about mean, there are many times they quantify. I mean, I'm as a student of statistics or econometrics, I'm a little more uncomfortable with the way they quantify, but I think we believe they're more robust. But they look at how they increase, the resources for providing support for the Millennium Development Goals by 3 trillion per year by 2030. Imagine for the next 7 years, if you want to provide something like 20 or 21 trillion dollars for supporting sustainable development goals. And they also bring in one more thing I just thought I will highlight here and I'll stop. Another thing which we have done extremely well as part of the India G20 presidency is making digital public infrastructure affordable to everybody in the world. It's not limited to the Paris Club, but I think what we are doing is we are trying to see that digital public infrastructure becomes a part and parcel of all the countries, not just G20 countries. And I think if you look at the report, there's so much written about how we can use the digital public infrastructure for increasing financial access or financial inclusion, and also provide more affordable and adequate finance for the global south. I think all these things have actually made India's presidency a very, very inclusive in my view. And as I said, there are many aspects of finance track is still work in progress, but we still have a lot of time. I think in the month of November only we are going to hand over to Brazil. So as Prime Minister pointed out, whatever the decisions that were made, I think we need to be tracking them until we give charge to the Brazil presidency. So I'm hopeful that many of the things that have been brought in, not just in the summit declaration, but also other research that happened across the working groups, will help make increase resources available for the sustainable development goals. As the report point out, I think if you look at the sustainable development goals, many of the goals are off track. I think that is the starting point of the MDB reforms. And I think any reform that happens in the MDBs, I think they need to focus on how to finance the increasingly unsustainable in a way, the resources needs for achieving the sustainable development goals. So at the end, I would like to tell you that please have a look at these two reports. One is that report by the Larry Summers and N.K. Singh. The other one is the summit declaration itself. I think it's going to be a great learning for all of us, especially the students who are from Department of Economics. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your address. I would now like to move into an interactive question and answer session with the audience members, and I would like Director Pammi Dua, Professor, to kindly take the session forward.
Thank you very much, and thanks also to our distinguished speakers. We'll take a couple of questions. I want our students to ask the questions, so students can raise their hands, identify themselves, give your name, the program you're enrolled in, and to whom the question is addressed. So students, please. Yeah, okay.
Good evening, sorry. My name is Sakhi and I'm from Department of Sociology, MA final year. And my question is, G20 summit talked about pressing issues like health and development. The world has recently recovered from a pandemic. How have world leaders deliberated on collective action against such future threats?
Okay, we'll take the second question as well. Second is from? Okay, there's one hand at the back there. Yeah.
Hello, good evening, sir. I am Rishika, second year MA Economics student. So my question is, what role will India play in advancing discussions on digital innovation and global trade within the G20 framework, given its fast growing digital economy?
Okay, thank you. So it hasn't been specified to whom it is addressed because all are learned here in this area. So I request the distinguished speakers to address these questions.
Thank you. I would just try to capture what is required by the two questions. Raki, your issue in terms of world pandemic and our preparedness and how far the declaration goes in terms of responding to this. As you might have realized, in Bali, we already announced setting up of a fund, pandemic fund, which would be there. And the details of it, the roadmap of it, has come from the Indian presidency. So that roadmap has come out absolutely clear in terms of enabling countries to cope up with the crisis. The second component is, which we found in case of Japan's presidency when it first began, is to think in terms of adopting sectoral strategy. So what I was saying in terms of development and finance and coming together, Japan for the first time tried it at the sectoral level, bringing in finance ministers and health ministers together to solve the perpetual crisis of resources for health sector. So Japan did it. India further continued and deepened the dialogue. So you find a sort of roadmap which has happened. It passed through a very difficult phase in terms of what Saudi had to do, what Italians had to do, and eventually in Indonesia, the idea of fund came in. So that's where it stands. And I think, as Banu also mentioned, I also suggested, please also see the declaration, and you would find several paragraphs which are dedicated in terms of how the capacity would be enhanced, in what way we can do that. So several dimensions are mentioned. Ritika, your question of advancing digital economy and what is it that we are doing in terms of identifying, as I was trying to mention, the debate is slightly polarized. It is polarized in the sense that there are countries which are very much interested in role of private sector to do everything. And what Ambassador Muktesh Pardeshi alluded to in terms of digital public goods and infrastructure. So when we talk of digital public infrastructure, we bring in a very fine balance between state and private sector. So how we bring in state and private sector, state in an enabling role and private sector for investment. The Aadhaar enabled e-payment services in India is a beautiful example of how state can help reduce transaction costs and provide access. So the point that I made, AEI, access, equity and inclusion. So if we have to advance that, that should be the motto. It's not the quantum of digital economy which matters, but extent of participation of people, to what extent people are able to participate. And this is very, very important. As Bhanu was saying, there is RBI's sort of focus in terms of how we enhance financial inclusion and how we enhance quality of financial inclusion. So when you have to enhance quality of financial inclusion, that's where your question becomes quite relevant. Thank you.
Yeah, Ambassador Pradeshi. That's all right. Professor Banamurthy, would you like to?
Just to add to what Sachin has already pointed out, if you look at the declaration, one of the items says that the leaders will have finance and health task force. I think that's one of the important. Where it actually starts from. Somewhere in I think the MDB report or one of the reports where I read, it clearly mentions that for the next COVID, world will not wait for 100 years. It will happen in next 20 years. I think that is the most scariest wording that is there in one of the reports. I don't know which report. And I think that's where it forced the leaders to really talk about how they can enhance coordination between the finance as well as the health. And I think going forward, the G20 would certainly focus more on that. And I think if you look at the first report of the MDB, also talks about how they should increase the resources for health by 1.2 trillion, I think, per annum, out of the 3 trillion. 1.2 trillion per annum should be supported for the health-related activities. I think that really shows that the leaders have actually taken care of those
issue. In terms of the digital public infrastructure, as students of economics, I'm sure all of you understand that ultimately this, infrastructure, digital public infrastructure should lead to reduction in the transaction cost and as well as the risk. I think that's what we look at. Now, if you look at India's infrastructure, the DPI, when you talk about UPI, you talk about many other instruments. Certainly, that can be a great example for making the digital public infrastructure available for all, countries. But if you look at the declaration, they made it as a voluntary, as the reasons already Sachin pointed out. Right now, it is only a voluntary group for digital public infrastructure. But again, I think that pressure things, maybe ambassador should tell us why it has become the voluntary kind of a thing rather than becomes a part of declaration.
It has become voluntary. You have to understand there is no common understanding of digital public infrastructure. So it was left upon Indian presidency to create a common understanding. But the different countries have their own national system, and they do not seed the ground for common understanding to evolve. So considering all those the issues, I think it was thought that we can have the voluntary standards time. What is important is in this the digital public infrastructure also creates business opportunities for India. I know for sure there were several delegations who saw the the exhibits, etc. They were keen to adopt them in their countries, and I believe some MOUs are being framed up by them and our Indian entities to have collaboration in this sector.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I'll take one last question. Yes, Neeraj, can you pass the mic here in the front? In the front here.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Neeraj Kumar. I am PhD research scholar at the Delhi School of Economics. I am doing my PhD with Professor Pami Dua. I would like to express my gratitude to Professor Dua for organizing this event and the distinguished speakers for sharing their insights with us. My question is for Professor Bhanumurthy. Sir, you mentioned about addressing the debt vulnerabilities in low and middle income countries, right? One of the challenges we have observed is the significant delays in implementing the common framework for debt treatments. These delays have led to prolonged debt restructuring processes, thereby worsening the economic challenges faced by the debtor countries. Additionally, there is a lack of clarity and consensus among the G20 creditors regarding how the principle of comparability of treatment should be applied. This has created uncertainty and hindered the implementation of the framework. The case of Sri Lanka has also highlighted this pressing challenge. Limited support from China, one of the Sri Lanka's major creditors, has complicated the country's debt restructuring process. China's absence from the debt restructuring platform adds a layer of complexity to addressing debt vulnerabilities in these countries. In the context of G20 Finance Track, what are your perspectives on addressing the delays in implementing and achieving the comparability of treatment principle within this framework? Additionally, how can we strategize and promote more active engagement from major creditors like China to facilitate smoother debt restructuring processes for countries facing significant challenges such as Sri Lanka? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Neeraj. I think these are some of the questions. I'm told the second report of independent expert group are supposed to come out, and I'm told it is going to be presented in Marrakesh in October 22nd or so. But having said that, Some of the things that the first report also highlighted, especially I talked about capital adequacy ratio. In fact, if you look at that report, very clearly mentioned that all the MDBs, they have the very least leverage ratios because of, you know, the kind of capital adequacy norms that is being imposed on them. And in fact, that report very clearly talks about making this MDB to take more risk. If you look at it's only the leverage ratio is very low in that sense. Whatever the resources that is being given to the MDBs, they are holding it because of some of the norms. And in fact, they also talked about increasing the general capital reserve. That is also one of the recommendations of the Larry Summers and Encasing report. But having said that, if you look at one thing which has got less focus, and only once it is mentioned in the leadership summit declaration, is the domestic resource mobilization. I know Sachin will remember me even before India took over the presidency. I've been talking about domestic resource mobilization and the domestic savings. And we know what's happening in India, right? For the past 20 days, there's so much of discussion about how the household financial savings are declining, how we are going to sustain that high GDP growth kind of a tag. All those things we are discussing right now. I think even in here, I think there is need for a little more focus on domestic resource mobilization, and that's how one can really help the countries to be on their own, not depending on other countries where they put more restrictions and all those things.
Thank you very much, and thanks to our distinguished speakers and also to our students. I know our students have a number of questions that they would like to share with you, so maybe we could do that in another forum, or the students can note the questions and I can pass them on to our distinguished speakers. It is very rare to find 3 distinguished speakers share the dais, so I think we are blessed today. We have a blessed audience, we have a blessed panel of speakers, and it's a blessed event in multiple ways, as we have already discussed. 100 years, 75 years, India's G20 presidency, and the way forward, which looks very bright. So thank you from my side.
I would once again like to thank everyone on the dais. I would now like to invite Professor Anuja Agarwal, Head Sociology Officiating, to deliver the vote of thanks.
On behalf of the Delhi School of Economics, University of Delhi, it is my privilege to extend a very gracious vote of thanks in the first place to the Research and Information System for Developing Countries for collaborating with the Delhi School of Economics in the organization of this distinguished lecture program, which is part of the G20 University Connect on G20 India Presidency, the way forward. I would like to thank all 3 of our very distinguished speakers, Ambassador Muktesh Pardesi for enlightening us on the organizational aspects of G20, particularly for the inferences that he has drawn on the inclusiveness of the G20 events and the effective organizational infrastructure and framework that he was so central in developing. It was, thank you very much, Ambassador Pardesi. It was very, enlightening for us to know about all the takeaways of, your view being at the center of this entire event. I would like to thank Professor Sachin Chaturvedi for walking us through the way G20 has come to where it stands today through all the nitty-gritties of, the various global financial, events. I don't understand many of those. I'm not from economics, but it was really quite, I think enlightening for us, and particularly the highlighting to us the role of the university and our students and faculty in, our role in future vis-a-vis this University Connect and, the research that can and that should be a part of this process as it unfolds. I would like to thank Professor Bhanumurthy for also telling us, to impressing upon how important India's role has been in this event and the success of India in averting some of the kinds of crises that other parts of the world have not been able to avert. The finance track, again, I'll be grappling myself with understanding many of these things, but I think the economics audience would have really gained a lot from this. So thank you again, all of you, for really making this a very enriching event, and for also leaving us with so many new questions and new sort of ideas about our continuing role in this entire process of the global sort of events like these. What is our role to play in this? I would like to thank the faculty of Delhi School of Economics. I would particularly also like to very much thank the students of Delhi School of Economics, all the students who have volunteered to make this event a success, all the students who are there taking part in this lecture event, also asking questions, and I hope taking away a lot of things from here. I would like to also thank the Delhi School of Economics staff. Their role in any such event is absolutely, essential. And last but not the least, I would like to thank Professor Pamidua for making this event such a success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. I once again would like to thank all the esteemed guests, faculty, and our distinguished speakers for coming to this session and making it a huge success. I would request the guests and faculty to proceed to room number 107 for refreshments. All the students are requested to wait back for further announcements. Thank you. Right. Before we move on, we'll have a group photo for everyone on the dais.